Marcus wiped the grease from his hands as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. Another 14-hour shift at the orbital shipyard had left him drained, but the overtime pay was worth it. Living on Station Harmony wasn't cheap, especially when you were sharing space with beings from across the galaxy. The door to apartment 4B slid open with a soft hiss, and Marcus stepped into the dimly lit living space he shared with Zephyra, his Altarian roommate. The apartment was standard issue for the station, compact, efficient, and designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. What made it unusual was the careful balance they'd struck between human and Altarian living preferences. Marcus had been living alone for 6 months when the housing authority informed him he'd be getting a roommate. Xenophobia still ran deep among many humans, but Marcus had always been curious about other species. When Zephyra arrived with her crystal and luggage containers and nervous energy, he'd done his best to make her feel welcome. That was 8 months ago, and they'd settled into a comfortable routine. Zephyra worked the night shift at the communications hub, translating deep space messages between various alien languages and human standard. Their schedules meant they rarely saw each other except in passing, a quick greeting as one left for work while the other returned. Marcus grabbed a nutrient pack from the cooling unit, noting that Zephyra had left him a message on the shared terminal. Her flowing script, translated from her native symbols, thanked him for adjusting the atmospheric controls in her room. Altarians preferred slightly higher humidity and a different gas mixture than humans, and the environmental systems could accommodate both with some tweaking. He was halfway through heating his meal when he realized he'd forgotten his data pad in the utility room. The device contained his shift schedules for the next week, and he needed to check if he'd picked up any additional overtime. Marcus made his way down the short hallway, past Zephyra's room toward the small utility space they used for storage and maintenance. The utility room door was slightly ajar, which was odd since they both usually kept it sealed to prevent atmospheric mixing. Marcus pushed it open, expecting to find a malfunction with the environmental controls, and froze. Zephyra stood in the center of the room, but she wasn't the Zephyra he knew. The tall, elegant being with pale blue skin and flowing silver hair was in the middle of what could only be described as a transformation. Her skin rippled like water, shifting from blue to a deep emerald green. Her hair darkened to black, and her height was changing, decreasing by several inches. Most shocking of all, her distinctive facial ridges, the raised bone structures that marked her as Altarian, were smoothing away. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand hitting the doorframe with a dull thud. The sound caused Zephyra to spin around, her large violet eyes wide with what he could only interpret as panic. Her transformation froze mid-change, leaving her caught between her usual appearance and something else entirely. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he tried to process what he was seeing. Everything he thought he knew about his roommate, about Altarians in general, suddenly seemed uncertain. "I can explain," Zephyra said, her voice carrying a tremor he'd never heard before. Even her accent seemed different, less of the melodic tones typical of her species and more like something else entirely. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you?" Instead of answering immediately, Zephyra's form continued shifting until she settled on her usual Altarian appearance. But now Marcus could see the effort it took, a subtle tension in her posture, a flicker around her edges as if she were maintaining a complex illusion. "My true name is Cassinda," she said finally. "And I am Vorthak." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Vorthak were shapeshifters, one of the most feared and distrusted species in known space. They'd been involved in numerous conflicts, their ability to mimic other species making them perfect spies and infiltrators. Most civilized worlds had strict laws governing their presence, and many stations like Harmony simply banned them entirely. "You're a spy," Marcus said, his mind racing through the implications. How many secrets had he unknowingly shared with her? How many other humans on the station were being deceived? "No," Cassinda said quickly, taking a step toward him. "Marcus, please, let me explain. I'm not here for any government or military organization. I'm a refugee." Marcus backed away, his hand moving instinctively toward the emergency communicator on his belt. "Refugee from what?" "From my own people." Her voice carried a weight of sadness that made Marcus pause. There was a civil war on our homeworld. Those of us who opposed the military expansion were marked for execution. I escaped with false identity documents and have been hiding here for almost 2 years. 2 years. Marcus tried to reconcile this information with everything he thought he knew. But, you've only been my roommate for 8 months. I lived in the lower sections before that, Cassinda explained. In the parts of the station where they don't ask too many questions about documentation. But, it's dangerous there, and, when the housing authority offered me this placement, I couldn't refuse. It meant safety, legitimacy, a chance at a real life. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but her expression seemed genuinely pained. Why tell me this now? You could have kept hiding. Because you saw me, she said simply. And, because I'm tired of lying to you. You've been kind to me, Marcus. You've treated me with respect and friendship, even when you thought I was just another alien taking up space on a human station. I've never had that before. The weight of her words settled between them. Marcus thought about the small kindnesses they'd exchanged over the months, how she always made sure to adjust the atmospheric controls back to human standard when she left for work, how she'd learned to cook human food just so he'd have something familiar waiting when he came home exhausted. How she'd sat up with him during the night when he'd received news of his father's death, even though she should have been sleeping before her shift. What happens now? Marcus asked. That depends on you, Cassinda replied. If you report me, I'll be arrested and likely deported back to Vorthak space, where I'll be executed. She paused, her violet eyes never leaving his face. But I won't blame you if that's what you choose to do. I deceived you, and I understand if you can't forgive that. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. By harboring a Vorthak refugee, he'd be breaking numerous laws. His job, his citizenship status, his entire future could be forfeit. But, as he looked at Cassinda, really looked at her, he saw something he'd missed before. The careful way she held herself, as if always ready to run. The sadness that sometimes flickered across her features when she thought no one was watching. The gratitude she showed for the smallest acts of kindness. How do I know you're telling the truth about being a refugee? He asked. Without hesitation, Cassinda moved to her personal storage container and retrieved a small data crystal. These are the records of my escape. Communications with the underground network that helped me flee. Evidence of the charges against me on my homeworld. She held the crystal out to him. You can verify everything. Marcus took the crystal, feeling its weight in his palm. Such a small thing to contain someone's entire life, their proof of innocence or guilt. And, if I choose to help you? Then, you'd be saving my life, she said quietly. But, I can't ask that of you. The risk is too great. Marcus looked around the utility room, at the environmental controls that allowed them to share this space despite their different biological needs. The station was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation between species, a place where different worlds could come together in peace. But, it was also built on laws and regulations that often failed to account for the complexities of real life. There's something else, Cassinda said, her voice barely audible. Something I need to ask of you, though I have no right to make any requests. Marcus waited, sensing that whatever came next would change everything between them. If you're going to turn me in, she said, could you wait until tomorrow night? There's someone else on the station, another Vorthak refugee. If I disappear suddenly, they'll know something's wrong and they'll run. But, if I have time to warn them properly, to help them establish a new cover identity somewhere else, then, at least one of us might survive. The request hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even facing her own potential death, Cassinda was thinking about protecting someone else. It was the most human thing he'd ever heard, and it came from someone who wasn't human at all. Who is it? He asked. A child, she whispered. Barely past molting age. Their parents were killed in the same purge that forced me to flee. I've been watching over them, making sure they have food and shelter. They don't even know what they really are, they were so young when we escaped that the false identity is all they remember. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 2 lives pressing down on him. A refugee woman who'd spent 2 years living in fear, and a child who didn't even understand the danger they were in. Two beings whose only crime was belonging to a species that had made enemies across the galaxy. When he opened his eyes again, Cassinda was watching him with an expression of resigned acceptance. She'd given him all the information he needed to make his decision, and now she was waiting for whatever came next. "Show me your true form," Marcus said quietly. Cassinda blinked in surprise. "What? You said your real name is Cassinda, and you're Vorthak. I want to see what you actually look like." For a moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, the familiar Altarian features began to shift away. Her skin darkened to a deep purple-black, like the void between stars. Her hair disappeared entirely, replaced by subtle ridges that ran across her scalp. Her height decreased slightly, and her build became more compact but stronger-looking. Most striking were her eyes. They remained violet, but now they seemed to hold depths that spoke of an ancient species, one that had learned to adapt and survive in a hostile universe. "This is me," she said in a voice that was deeper than her Altarian disguise, with harmonics that suggested a completely different vocal structure. Marcus studied her face, looking for some sign of the deception he'd been taught to expect from her species. Instead, he saw exhaustion, hope, fear, and something that looked very much like trust. "You're beautiful," he said, and meant it. Cassinda's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "I said you're beautiful. Different from what I expected, but beautiful." Marcus set the data crystal on a nearby shelf and crossed his arms. "Now, tell me about this child you're protecting, and let's figure out how to keep both of you safe." 3 days had passed since Marcus discovered Cassinda's true nature, and the apartment felt different now. Not uncomfortable, but charged with a new understanding that changed everything between them. She no longer maintained her Altarian disguise when they were alone, and Marcus found himself appreciating the subtle beauty of her natural form, the way her purple-black skin seemed to absorb light, the graceful ridges that crowned her head, the ancient wisdom in her violet eyes. They'd spent hours going through the data crystal she'd given him. The records were genuine, communications from Vorthak resistance cells, documentation of the civil war that had torn her world apart, and evidence of the death sentences issued against those who'd opposed the military regime. Cassinda hadn't just been telling the truth, she'd been understating the danger she faced. But it was the child that occupied most of Marcus's thoughts. Cassinda had taken him to meet Genkar 2 days ago, in the depths of the station's lower levels where the lighting was perpetually dim and the air recyclers worked overtime to process the mixed atmosphere of dozens of species. The child looked human, completely, utterly human. Brown hair, brown eyes, pale skin with a smattering of freckles across the nose. If Marcus hadn't known better, he would have assumed Genkar was just another human orphan trying to survive in the station's forgotten corners. The shape-shifting ability was so complete that it fooled even advanced medical scanners. "Cas." Genkar had called out when they arrived at the small alcove that served as the child's home. The space was barely large enough for a sleeping mat and a few personal belongings, but Cassinda had made sure it was safe and hidden. "Did you bring food?" "Always," Cassinda had replied, producing a container of nutrient paste and some actual fruit she'd managed to acquire. "And I brought someone I want you to meet." Marcus had crouched down to the child's level, noting the way Genkar's eyes darted between him and the exit, a survival instinct that no child should need to develop. "Hello, Genkar. I'm Marcus. Are you going to take me away?" the child asked in perfect standard, though Marcus could detect the faint accent that marked non-native speakers. "No," Marcus had said firmly. "I'm here to help." Now, sitting in his apartment while Cassinda worked her shift, Marcus was deep in research. He'd spent hours scouring legal databases, looking for any precedent or loophole that might help 2 Vorthak refugees. What he'd found wasn't encouraging. The laws were clear and unforgiving. Unauthorized Vorthak presence was a criminal offense, punishable by immediate deportation regardless of circumstances. But Marcus had also found something else. Buried in the legal code was an obscure provision for asylum seekers who could demonstrate extraordinary circumstances and who had integrated peacefully into station community life. The criteria were deliberately vague, designed to give administrators discretion in unusual cases. The problem was that applying for asylum would require revealing their true nature to the authorities. It was an enormous gamble. If the application was denied, they'd face immediate arrest. Marcus was still reading when Cassinda returned from her shift. She entered quietly, her natural form moving with a fluid grace that her Altarian disguise had never quite captured. "You're still awake," she observed, settling onto the couch beside him. "You need to sleep, Marcus. You've been researching for 3 days straight." "I think I found something," Marcus said, turning his data pad toward her. "There's a legal provision for asylum seekers. It's a long shot, but it might work." Cassinda read through the relevant sections, her expression growing more troubled with each line. "This would require us to reveal ourselves to Station Command. If they refuse the application." "I know," Marcus said. "But I've been thinking about the alternative. How long can you keep this up? How long can Genkar survive in the lower levels? The child is only 10 years old, Kes. They need education, proper nutrition, medical care. They need a real life. And if we're deported?" Marcus met her eyes. "Then, at least you'll face it together, and you'll know you tried everything." Cassinda was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her knee in a rhythm that seemed distinctly non-human. "There's something else to consider," she said finally. "Something I haven't told you." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What?" "If we apply for asylum and it's granted, we'd be the first Vorthak refugees officially recognized by the Galactic Council. It would set a precedent. Other refugees could follow, use our case as justification for their own applications." She paused. "But it would also paint a target on this station. The Vorthak military regime would see it as harboring enemies of the state." "You're talking about potential retaliation," Marcus said. "I'm talking about war," Cassinda replied bluntly. "The current government on my homeworld is paranoid and aggressive. If they believed this station was actively working against them, they might take military action. Thousands of innocent beings live here, Marcus. I can't risk their lives for my own safety." Marcus leaned back against the couch, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. It wasn't just about 2 refugees anymore, it was about the safety of an entire station, about setting precedents that could affect countless others, about taking a stand against injustice even when the cost might be enormous. "What if there was another way?" Marcus said slowly. "What if we could guarantee the station's safety while still protecting you and Genkar?" "How?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. It was dangerous, possibly illegal, and would require him to make use of connections he'd hoped never to need. "But it might work. My brother," he said finally. "David. He's a captain in the human defense fleet, stationed at the Centauri shipyards. If I contacted him, explained the situation, he might be able to provide security guarantees for the station." Cassinda stared at him. "You'd risk your brother's career for us?" David's always been idealistic about human values, protection of the innocent, standing up to tyranny, that sort of thing. If anyone would understand the moral imperative here, it would be him. Marcus paused. "But, you're right, it would be a risk for him too." "Marcus, you've already done more than anyone could ask. You don't owe us anything more." "This isn't about owing," Marcus said. "This is about what's right." They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Cassinda spoke. "There's one more thing you should know before you make any decisions," she said. "About why I chose to reveal myself to you instead of just running when you discovered me." "Okay." In Vorthak culture, when someone sees your true form without permission, it creates a bond called Shintaler. It means one who knows the hidden self. Traditionally, it's a relationship of profound trust and mutual obligation. Marcus frowned. "What kind of obligation?" "The person who sees becomes responsible for protecting the secret, and the one revealed becomes bound to serve and protect the seer. It's an ancient custom, one that most of my people have abandoned, but..." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But you still believe in it," Marcus finished. "Yes. Which means that by revealing myself to you, I've bound myself to your service. If you asked me to leave this station and never return, I would. If you asked me to sacrifice my life for yours, I would. The Shintaler bond supersedes all other obligations." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Kes, that's a form of slavery. No, she said firmly. It's trust. Perfect, absolute trust. I've seen your character, Marcus. I know you would never abuse such a bond. That's why I was willing to invoke it. But what if I make the wrong decision? What if my choices get you killed? Then, I'll die knowing that someone I trusted made the best decision they could with the information they had. Cassinda reached out and took his hand, her skin warm despite its alien appearance. That's more than most of my people ever get. Marcus stared at their joined hands, human and Vorthak, different species bound together by circumstance and choice. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. They had a chance to do something that had never been done before, to create a bridge between species that had been enemies, to prove that understanding was possible even in the face of fear and prejudice. I need to ask you something, Marcus said. And I need you to answer honestly, even if you think it's not what I want to hear. Anything. If we go through with this asylum application, if we contact my brother for protection, if we put everything on the line, do you believe it will work? Not what you hope might happen, but what you actually believe will happen. Cassinda was quiet for a long time, her violet eyes focused on some distant point. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. I believe, she said, that humans are capable of extraordinary things when they decide to do what's right instead of what's safe. I've seen it in you, Marcus. You've already chosen to protect 2 aliens who could get you arrested or killed, and you've done it without asking for anything in return. That kind of courage is rare in the galaxy. That's not an answer to my question. Yes, it is. She squeezed his hand. I believe in you, Marcus. I believe in what humans can accomplish when they set their minds to it. And I believe that if anyone can make this work, it's you and your species. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a crystallization of resolve that surprised him with its intensity. Then, we're going to do it. All of it. The asylum application, contacting David, everything. Even knowing the risks? Especially knowing the risks. Marcus stood up, pulling Cassinda to her feet with him. But, first, we're going to do this right. We're going to gather every piece of evidence we can, document everything, and build a case so strong that even the most xenophobic administrator would have to approve it. And, if they still refuse? Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since discovering Cassinda's secret, he felt truly confident about their chances. Then, they'll have to explain to the human defense fleet why they're willing to let children die for the sake of bureaucratic convenience. I have a feeling that conversation won't go well for them. Cassinda stared at him for a moment, then began to laugh. It was a sound unlike anything Marcus had heard before, not the melodic tones of her Altarian disguise, but something deeper and richer, with harmonics that spoke of joy and relief and hope all mixed together. What's funny? Marcus asked. I was wrong, she said, still laughing. About humans being capable of extraordinary things when they decide to do what's right. Wrong how? You don't just do extraordinary things, Cassinda said, her violet eyes bright with something that looked very much like affection. You make them look easy. The communications array aboard the HDF Meridian hummed with encrypted transmissions as Captain David Chen reviewed the data packet his brother had sent 3 days ago. The evidence was overwhelming: detailed records of Vorthak war crimes, documentation of refugee persecution, and, most importantly, verified intelligence about military movements in Vorthak space that suggested an imminent expansion into neutral territory. David set down his coffee and opened a secure channel to Station Harmony's command center. Admiral Sarah Okafor appeared on his screen, her expression grim. Captain Chen, she said without preamble. I've been expecting your call. Your brother's asylum application has created quite a stir in the upper echelons of command. What's the status, Admiral? Complicated. Okafor leaned back in her chair. The legal review board is split. Half want to approve the application immediately based on the intelligence value alone. The other half are concerned about setting a precedent that could flood our stations with Vorthak refugees. David frowned. With respect, Admiral, isn't that exactly what we should want? If the Vorthak government is planning aggressive expansion, having a network of refugees who can provide intelligence would be invaluable. That's the argument your brother made, actually. He's been quite persuasive in his presentations to the board. But there's another complication. Which is, the Vortak government has filed a formal diplomatic protest. They're claiming that Marcus and his associates are actually war criminals who escaped prosecution, and they're demanding extradition. David felt his blood run cold. Do we have any way to verify that claim? Your brother anticipated that question. He submitted additional evidence yesterday, communications from Vortak resistance cells confirming that Cassinda and the child are exactly who they claim to be. The war criminal accusation is clearly false. Then, what's the problem? Admiral Okafor was quiet for a moment. The problem, Captain, is that the Vortak government has implied that harboring these refugees would be considered an act of war. David stared at the screen, processing the implications. They're threatening military action over 2 refugees? It's not really about the refugees, Okafor said. Our intelligence suggests this is a pretext. The Vortak military has been looking for an excuse to test human resolve, to see how we respond to pressure. If we back down now, it signals weakness. If we stand firm, we might be looking at armed conflict. What does Command recommend? That's where you come in, Captain. The decision has been kicked up to Fleet Admiral Morrison, and he wants recommendations from field commanders. Your opinion carries weight because of your brother's involvement, but, more importantly, because the Meridian is currently the closest major human defense vessel to Vortak space. David looked out the viewport at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them was his brother, risking everything for 2 aliens he barely knew. It was exactly the kind of idealistic gesture that had gotten Marcus into trouble throughout their childhood, and exactly the kind of courage that David had always admired about him. Admiral, David said finally, what's your read on the military situation? If this does escalate to conflict, what are we looking at? Honestly? The Vortak Navy is formidable, but they're dealing with internal strife. Our intelligence suggests that a significant portion of their fleet is tied up in their civil war. In a straight fight, we'd have the advantage, but the cost would be enormous. And if we don't fight? Then, we establish a precedent that human territory can be influenced by threats and intimidation. That's a precedent we can't afford to set. David was quiet for several minutes, thinking through the strategic implications. Finally, he made his decision. Admiral, I'd like to make a formal recommendation. Go ahead, Captain. Approve the asylum application. But, more than that, make it a public announcement. Let the galaxy know that humanity stands ready to protect refugees from persecution, regardless of species or political consequences. That's a bold stance, Captain. Are you prepared to back it up? With the full firepower of the Meridian, if necessary. David paused. But, I don't think it will come to that. Explain. The Vortak government is bluffing. They're hoping we'll back down because they can't afford a real war any more than we can. But, they're counting on us being afraid of the consequences. If we call their bluff publicly, they'll have to either escalate beyond what they can sustain, or back down and lose face with their own people. Admiral Okafor nodded slowly. It's a dangerous gamble, Captain. Yes, ma'am. But, it's the right thing to do. 2 days later, Marcus stood in the conference room of Station Harmony's administrative center, watching as Commander Torres reviewed the final asylum documents. Cassinda sat beside him in her natural form, her violet eyes steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Across from them, little Genkar fidgeted in a chair that was too big, still maintaining the human appearance that had become second nature. The application has been approved, Commander Torres announced, and Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Both applicants are hereby granted refugee status under Section 847 of the Galactic Accords, with full protection under human law. What happens now? Cassinda asked. Now you become the first officially recognized Vortak refugees in human space, Torres replied. You'll be granted residential permits, work authorizations, and access to all station services. In exchange, you've agreed to provide intelligence briefings to our security team about the situation on your homeworld. Marcus noticed that the commander hadn't mentioned the public announcement aspect. "Commander, will this be made public?" Torres smiled grimly. "That decision came from the very top. Fleet Admiral Morrison has authorized a full press release. The galaxy will know that humanity stands ready to protect those fleeing persecution. Even if it means conflict with the Vorthak government? Especially if it means conflict with the Vorthak government." Torres leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, what you and your brother have accomplished here goes far beyond helping two individuals. You forced humanity to take a stand on one of the fundamental questions of galactic civilization: do we protect the innocent, even when it's difficult?" Over the following weeks, the response was everything they had hoped for and more. The public announcement sparked widespread debate throughout human space, but the majority opinion was overwhelmingly supportive. More importantly, it sent a clear message to other species that humanity was willing to back up its ideals with action. The Vorthak government's response was swift and predictable: angry diplomatic protests, accusations of harboring criminals, and veiled threats of retaliation. But, as David had predicted, they were unwilling to follow through on their threats. Within a month, intelligence reports suggested that the Vorthak military regime was facing increased pressure from their own people, who saw the refugee crisis as evidence of their government's brutality. But, perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the announcement, a small ship arrived at Station Harmony carrying 5 more Vorthak refugees. They'd heard about Kessindet and Genkar's successful asylum application and had risked everything to reach human space. Marcus was working late in the shipyard when he received the message that more refugees had arrived. He found Kessindet in the station's main plaza, speaking with the newcomers in their native language. The conversation was animated, full of gestures and expressions that Marcus was learning to interpret. "They're asking if it's true," she told him as he approached. "If humans really will protect them without asking for anything in return." "What did you tell them?" Kessinda looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her violet eyes that he'd never seen before: not just hope, but certainty. "I told them about a human who risked everything for 2 aliens he barely knew. Who saw past fear and prejudice to the people underneath. Who proved that humanity's reputation for standing up for the innocent isn't just propaganda." She paused, then added quietly, "I told them about you, Marcus." Over the following months, the trickle of refugees became a steady stream. Station Harmony became known throughout the galaxy as a place where those fleeing persecution could find safety, regardless of species or origin. A special refugee services department was established, with Kessinda as its director and Marcus as the human liaison. The work was challenging, often dangerous, and always politically complicated. But it was also deeply rewarding. Each successful asylum case represented lives saved, families reunited, and hope restored for beings who had thought they had nowhere left to turn. The Vorthak Civil War eventually ended with the overthrow of the military regime, thanks in part to intelligence provided by the refugee network. The new government formally apologized for their predecessors' persecution and established their own refugee assistance programs. Marcus and Kessinda's partnership deepened over time, evolving from roommates to colleagues to something that defied easy categorization. The Shantaler bond she had spoken of became less about obligation and more about mutual respect and affection. They worked together, lived together, and gradually built something that looked very much like a family when Genkar officially became their ward. One evening, almost a year after that first accidental discovery in the utility room, Marcus found Kessinda on the observation deck, staring out at the stars in her natural form. She no longer hid her true appearance except when official protocol required it, and the station's residents had grown accustomed to seeing various alien species in their natural states. "Regrets?" Marcus asked, joining her at the viewport. "About which part?" "Any of it. Revealing yourself to me, staying on the station, everything that followed." Kessinda was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "The only thing I regret is waiting so long to trust you." She turned to face him. "What about you? Do you regret getting involved in galactic politics?" Marcus thought about everything that had happened: the late nights spent reviewing asylum applications, the tense diplomatic meetings, the constant pressure from various political factions. Then, he thought about the families they'd reunited, the children they'd saved, the future they were building together. No, he said firmly. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's not the quiet life you had before? Marcus laughed. Quiet was overrated anyway. He paused, then added more seriously, besides, someone once told me that humans are capable of extraordinary things when they decide to do what's right instead of what's safe. I figured it was time I lived up to that reputation. Cassinda smiled, the expression transforming her alien features into something unmistakably warm and affectionate. You know, there's something else about the Shin-Taylor bond that I never mentioned. What's that? In the old stories, it sometimes evolved into something deeper. A bond not just of trust and obligation, but of genuine partnership. Two beings from different worlds, building something new together. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. And what would that be called? Shin-Taylor Tai, Cassinda said softly. It means one who knows the hidden self and chooses to stay anyway. Marcus reached out and took her hand, marveling again at how natural it felt despite the differences in their physiology. I like the sound of that. Even though it would mean being bound to an alien for the rest of your life? Especially because it means being bound to you, Marcus replied. As they stood together on the observation deck, watching ships arrive and depart from the station's docking bays, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that evening in the utility room. He'd started out as a simple shipyard worker sharing an apartment with an alien roommate. Now he was part of something larger, a movement that was reshaping how species interacted with each other, a testament to the power of understanding over fear. And, at the center of it all was his partnership with Cassinda, built on trust, strengthened by shared purpose, and deepened by something that transcended the boundaries between their species. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was exactly the life he wanted. And, judging by the content expression on Cassinda's alien features, she felt the same way. In the distance, another refugee ship was requesting permission to dock.